The other night at a dinner party, I watched a woman, let's call her Sarah, sit mostly in silence. While everyone else was shouting over the loud music and clinking glasses, she was focused on the way the candlelight hit the table, occasionally nodding, but rarely speaking. A man next to me leaned over and whispered, "She's a bit cold, isn't she? It's like she's not even here." He seemed almost frustrated by her quietness, as if her lack of noise was a sign of being disconnected or even judgmental. But then the conversation shifted. Someone mentioned a mutual friend going through a sudden, devastating crisis. The man next to me immediately started offering rational fixes. Lawyers, logic, a step-by-step plan to fix the situation. Sarah, the cold one, finally leaned in. She didn't offer a spreadsheet or a lecture. She described the emotional weight the friend was carrying with such precision and empathy that the entire table went silent. It wasn't coldness at all. It was a profound, deep pathway resonance that the rest of us were too busy talking to notice. That instant shift from being judged as socially lacking to being the most perceptive person in the room is something many of us have felt. We spend our lives being told we're too sensitive, too rational, or too quiet. We treat these traits like character flaws or wrong settings in our software. But what if there is no wrong setting? Modern neuroscience is beginning to reveal that these aren't personality quirks. They are specialized calibrations of the human brain. We aren't just smart or not smart. Instead, our minds are constantly performing what researchers call the four dances. Whether you are the one who rages against a crowd or the one who needs a silent room to feel human again, you aren't malfunctioning. You are simply performing the dance your brain was built for. The real question isn't how much intelligence you have, but rather, which of the four dances are you actually doing?
That's a fantastic way to set the stage. I mean, that anecdote really illustrates the core conflict we're getting into today.
It really does.
It's that friction, right? When these different cognitive, emotional, and, well, even hormonal specializations, they just smash up against the demands of modern life.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive. It's really customized for you, the listener, to explore this really complex interplay. We're looking how these specialized forms of intelligence, Sarah's empathy versus that guy's pure analytical focus, how they clash with our hormones, and the very specific challenges that come up when we try to navigate the modern social and, I think critically, the mating landscape.
Yeah, the mating landscape is key. We're going to be taking a pretty hard look at what some call the evolutionary mismatch, between our kind of silent analytical brains and this hyper-stimulated, often very misleading digital world we all live in.
So the central question that's going to guide us through this whole exploration is this: which cognitive dance is your brain performing? And how does that specific calibration affect your social status, your decisions about whether to conform or not, and your ability to form relationships in this mismatched world?
And I think we have to start with what, for many people, is the most paradoxical calibration of all, the intellectual mind and its constant struggle with the heart.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this, because it feels totally counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If someone has this, incredible cognitive capacity, if they're brilliant, why would that sophistication actually lead to difficulty in something so fundamental as a relationship?
Right. Why would being smart make you bad at love?
Yeah.
Well, the sources we looked at suggest it's not that their intelligence is faulty. It's more that they're misapplying their most powerful tool.
How so?
When you spend your life mastering these complex logical systems, coding or law or physics, whatever it is, you just instinctively approach everything that way, including relationships. You treat it like a problem to be solved.
Or a puzzle box to be unlocked.
Exactly. It becomes the intellectual dance. And your greatest strength, your analytical mind, suddenly becomes your biggest liability on the emotional dance floor.
So it's their superpower becoming their kryptonite.
Perfectly put. And this shows up as just this constant, overwhelming tendency to overthink and analyze everything. People with really high IQs, they analyze their own feelings way too deeply. They're trying to find a logical structure in something that's just inherently messy.
And they do the same to their partner's actions, I'd imagine.
Constantly. They'll treat a casual interaction like it's a complex theorem that needs to be dissected and proven.
Can you give us a concrete example of this?
Yeah.
This analysis paralysis? What's that actually look like day to day?
Oh, it happens all the time with ambiguous communication. So for instance, a high IQ person gets a text from a partner that just says K.
Okay.
Instead of just seeing, okay, their mind just explodes with simulations. It's K, one letter. That's dismissive. It signals emotional withdrawal, maybe passive aggression. Is this a test? Is she disagreeing with what I just said? I better go back and review our last 5 conversations for some unresolved variable.
Right.
They literally build an entire logical case file from a single letter. And it stops them from just, texting back, see you at 8. They're always thinking about the relationship instead of just being in it.
And that's so fascinating because that analytical mindset, it also trips them up on really basic assumptions about just benign human behavior.
Yeah.
I noticed the sources specifically call out the Hanlon's razor failure.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Why is that principle so hard for them to apply in romance?
Well, Hanlon's razor, says never attribute to malice what you can just explain with a simple mistake or incompetence. But the intelligent mind, it craves complex causes. Simple answers feel unsatisfying.
So in a relationship, if their partner is just distracted or, forgets an anniversary because of traffic,
they reject that simple, messy human explanation. Traffic, exhaustion, just genuinely forgetting. It doesn't fit their model of a perfectly calibrated, rational partner, so they start searching for the hidden plot.
They assume there has to be a deeper meaning.
They do. They jump straight to assuming negative intent or malice or some kind of complex strategic plot. They're asking, what's the real reason this happened? Is this a subtle hint that she's losing interest? Is this a power play? They build this dense, logical case against their partner for a crime that partner has no idea they even committed.
All because their system demands a sophisticated explanation, not a simple, messy human one.
And that leads to constant conflict over things that are perceived, not real.
This analytical approach, it also seems to create this kind of internal mask. This idea of emotional immaturity being hidden by intellectual pride.
Absolutely. Some intelligent people really do equate high IQ with stoicism. They've convinced themselves that having strong feelings is a sign of, intellectual weakness and inefficiency they've evolved past.
So they just rely on pure logic.
Which often results in this profound emotional immaturity. I mean, they might have a massive intellectual understanding of emotion. They can quote Freud, they can analyze the neurochemistry of love.
But they can't handle it in their own life.
They lack the practical capacity. They never learned how to just feel their emotions instead of thinking about them.
The sources mention this can lead to what they call secret toddler tantrums.
It does, because they suppress all their genuine emotional needs until they just boil over, often in these really unpredictable, highly irrational ways. And it happens precisely because they've cut off the communication between their conscious mind and their limbic system. They're brilliant adults with the emotional regulation skills of a frustrated 3-year-old.
Which leads us to the most vital distinction here. IQ is not EQ. These are two completely different dances.
And the sources are really emphatic about this. They say intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence are, quote, wildly different things. EQ isn't some guaranteed side effect of being smart.
It's a skill.
It is a specific, learnable skill. The ability to detect, use, understand, and manage emotion in yourself and in other people. You can be a genius in theoretical physics and be completely handicapped in telling the difference between sadness and mild annoyance on your partner's face.
And that lack of a skill set, it creates a huge communication clash, right?
Yeah.
Especially, according to some analyses, for men in the dating world.
It's a profound barrier. When a high IQ man communicates, he defaults to his strongest setting. Analytical, logical, fact-driven. He's delivering concepts, solutions, information. The conversation is structured like a mathematical proof.
But his partner is looking for something else entirely.
Often, yes. The partner is seeking emotional connection, playful teasing, stories that have an emotional arc. Not just a summary of facts. The logical monologue just fails to create that spark, that bond. He's trying to solve a problem when all she wants is to share a feeling.
It's the difference between giving a weather report and telling a story about being trapped in a hurricane. One has facts, the other creates a connection.
That's a perfect analogy. And if they do try to engage in that playful teasing, they often misjudge the emotional boundary or the tone. And it can come across as accidentally cruel because their logical calibration just doesn't have the required emotional nuance.
Okay, let's move past the psychological struggles for a second and look at the cold, hard math of the mating market. Because the sources suggest that high intelligence creates a severe selection problem.
This might be the starkest finding of all. Research suggests that people are typically most attracted to partners within a pretty tight IQ range of themselves.
How tight are we talking?
About a 5 to 10 point range. That range ensures you have intellectual parity, you have compatible cognitive speeds, you get each other's jokes, you share reference points.
Okay, so if you're close to the average IQ, that's fine. Your potential pool of partners is enormous.
Right.
But what happens when you're way out on the far end of the bell curve?
The pool just collapses. This is what the sources call the mathematical barrier to compatibility. If you have an IQ of 140, which is in the gifted range, that high threshold just severely restricts who is even available to you.
So if you're looking for someone within 10 points of you,
you're looking for someone in the 98th percentile of intelligence. Statistically, that shrinks your available mating pool to less than 2% of the general population.
And that's before you even start applying all the other filters: age, attraction, values, location. The odds just get worse and worse.
And they stack up incredibly fast. And the consequence is that the high IQ person often finds themselves in a relationship where their partner is outside that ideal range, a scenario sometimes called dating down.
And when they are in that kind of relationship, they face what the sources call the burden of simplification, which sounds exhausting.
It is. It's an almost constant cognitive load. To maintain a conversation, to feel connected, the higher IQ partner has to engage in these multiple layered thought processes. They can never really relax their mind.
Walk us through those 3 layers of thought. I think it really illustrates the struggle.
Okay, so first, you have the person's own internal complex thought generation, the natural speed and depth of how they think. That's effortless for them.
Step 1.
Step 2, they have to immediately stop that natural flow and assess their partner's knowledge on the subject. They have to do a mental scan like, okay, how much does my partner already know about 18th century philosophy before I bring up Kant?
Just that second step requires a huge amount of mental energy.
It does. And then you get to step 3, which is the most exhausting of all. They have to simplify their complex thought for clear, digestible communication and do it in a way that doesn't sound patronizing.
Wow.
This constant 3-step mental translation is profoundly tiring. It just drains the person's energy. It leads to disinterest, or if they fail at the simplification part, they just end up constantly correcting their partner or pointing out flaws in their logic.
Which would create immense frustration for both of them. One person feels perpetually corrected, the other feels perpetually stifled.
And that intelligence gap becomes a wall. And finally, in this point, it's not just the IQ number itself, it's the psychological expression of that intelligence that causes friction. We're talking about a clash of personality types.
Right. The sources connect high IQ most consistently to the intuition type in personality frameworks, the N type.
Yeah, that's where the MBTI framework becomes a useful shorthand. The trait most consistently linked to high IQ is intuition, or N type, which is only prevalent in about 25% of the population.
And what defines an N type?
N-types are often unconventional. They're drawn to abstract thought, they question everything, they're focused on future possibilities, not the here and now. They're looking for the why and the what if.
And that directly clashes with the majority of the population, the sensor or S-types, who are the other 75%.
Exactly. S-type partners are inherently more practical, more traditional, focus on the tangible reality of the present, the how and the what. So you get this fundamental clash where the N-type partner is constantly reevaluating the relationship, questioning its very foundations, which can come across as constant criticism to the S-type partner who just wants to live in the moment and enjoy some stability.
So they're a minority within a minority, searching for a partner while their own mind treats love like a logic puzzle they're destined to fail.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Okay, so we've established the cognitive dance, that struggle between analytical intelligence and emotional need. Now, I want to shift gears pretty completely to the third dance, which is the hormonal one. Specifically, how basal testosterone fundamentally changes an individual's receptivity to nonconformity and, crucially, to taking risks for status.
This is a really fascinating area. We're moving beyond just internal psychology now and into social decision-making. And when we talk about testosterone, the conventional wisdom just paints it as a source of aggression, right? Or antisocial behavior.
Right, that's the stereotype.
But the sources show this growing consensus that its primary function is better captured by what's called the status hypothesis. The goal is to enhance and protect your social standing.
That's a crucial reframing. So testosterone isn't an aggression button, it's a status regulator. And we should probably clarify what basal testosterone means.
Good point. Basal testosterone is your circulating resting level of the hormone. It's not the acute spikes you get from, say, winning a competition. It's your chronic hormonal baseline. And that baseline influences your default strategic setting for social competition.
And so how does the social context then dictate the specific behavior a high T individual might use?
Well, high basal T tends to increase overall status-seeking behavior, especially when your current status is challenged or there's a clear opportunity to climb the ladder. But in modern society, pure aggression is usually a bad move. You get fired, you get arrested.
It's high cost.
Yeah. Very high cost. So the specific behavior, whether it's pro-social leadership or strategic risk-taking or even confrontation, is dictated by what the context says is the most instrumental, lowest-cost path to gaining or protecting status. The system is always optimizing for social standing.
Which brings us to the specific study we looked at, the link between basal T and adopting minority positions. Why is going against the crowd considered so much riskier?
The psychological research is pretty clear on this. People perceive adopting a minority position as inherently risky because the outcomes are just so polarized. It's either a huge gain or a huge loss, an asymmetric gamble.
Let's break down that risk calculation because I think it's central to understanding what motivates this kind of maverick behavior.
Okay, so if you adopt the minority position, the low consensus view, and you turn out to be right, the payoff is massive. You become the one person who demonstrated superior insight. You were the only one who knew better. That's a huge status boost.
But if you're wrong,
the loss is just as high. You look foolish, you look incompetent because everybody else knew better. You stuck your neck out and got it chopped off.
from just joining the majority, that's just playing it safe. Status maintenance.
Exactly. Adopting the majority view, whether it ends up being right or wrong, is safe. It doesn't really help or hurt your status much. So it follows that only individuals whose hormonal setting primes them for these high-stakes status games would even be receptive to the high-risk, high-reward minority view.
And the study with 250 participants provides the hard data here. What did they find about testosterone levels and susceptibility to influence?
The finding was so elegantly specific. Higher levels of basal testosterone were positively associated with susceptibility to minority influence. Low consensus. In fact, the higher the T levels, the more open that person was to the risky, non-consensus position.
And here's the critical distinction. What about the majority view? How did T levels affect that?
It didn't. Susceptibility to majority influence was entirely unaffected by basal testosterone levels. And this is a really critical point. It completely rules out the simple idea that high T just makes you a contrarian who resists all social influence.
No, it's targeted.
It's a targeted receptivity based on the status calculus. It strongly supports that status-risk connection. High T individuals are strategically open-minded to minority positions because that's the only path to demonstrating superiority and gaining status.
They're chasing the big win.
They are. And it's also vital to note the nuance here. They were equally receptive to the majority position. If the majority view was the best way to protect their already high status, they'd take it. The minority position is only attractive when it's an opportunity to gain status.
And the low T individuals.
They overwhelmingly preferred the majority position. They're generally playing for status maintenance, not status pursuit. They want the safe option.
And the researchers also found a cognitive mechanism here, not just a behavior one. The high T person wasn't just saying they were open-minded. Their brain was actually processing it differently.
Yes, there was a genuine cognitive shift. As basal testosterone increased, their cognitive responses toward the persuasive message from the minority became significantly more favorable. They were generating more supportive arguments. They were engaging more deeply with the non-consensus view. They truly believed it more.
So if high testosterone individuals are basically hardwired to be more open to non-consensus positions, what does that tell us about their role in society, in innovation, in challenging the status quo?
The research suggests they might function as these crucial catalysts of social change. Their open-mindedness to minority opinions, which is driven by this calculus of potential status gain, is what facilitates innovation and societal shifts. They are the mavericks, the disruptors, but they're doing it instrumentally in pursuit of a higher social standing.
So the first dance showed us logic failing in love. The second showed us hormones driving risk for status. The third dance now turns our attention back to intelligence. But this time, emotional intelligence, used as a tactical, almost amoral asset. This is the strategic use of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and we have to really shift the traditional focus here. Most of the research on emotional intelligence, or EI, treats it as this purely pro-social thing, a skill for teamwork, empathy, harmony.
Soft skill.
Soft skill, exactly. But in competitive environments, like most modern workplaces, where people are fighting for scarce resources like money, promotions, status, the sources show that high EI individuals are fundamentally likely to use their skills strategically for personal gain, even at the expense of others.
So EQ is just another high-leverage tool like IQ or networking for the purpose of getting ahead.
Precisely. High EI provides very distinct advantages in competitive situations, and that word strategic is key. It emphasizes that EI is used consciously or subconsciously to serve self-interested goals. It's about leveraging your ability to manage emotions, both your own and others, as a lever of control and influence.
Okay, let's break down the 4 specific tactics the sources identify. Starting with tactic 1, how they manage their attention.
Tactic 1 is focusing on strategically important targets. High EI individuals understand that detecting emotions is cognitively expensive. It takes energy. So they maximize their resources by focusing their efforts primarily on people whose attitudes and behaviors actually control their work outcomes.
They're supervisors, key clients, decision makers.
Right. They ignore everyone else whose emotional state has no bearing on their career. And a high EI subordinate becomes a master at reading the subtle cues from their supervisor, vocal tone, posture, micro gestures. They read the boss's mood and tailor their delivery.
And they can display emotions strategically too.
Oh, absolutely. Exaggerated gratitude for feedback, feigned excitement about a boring project. It's all designed to build an emotional bond that the supervisor subconsciously registers as positive. It looks like pro-social behavior, but it serves a clear, long-term strategic goal of ingratiation.
When you flip that dynamic,
Yeah.
how does a high EI supervisor use this skill?
A high EI supervisor is actively scanning the emotions of their key subordinates to figure out how to use their ambitions for the supervisor's own goals. They can spot hidden resentments, anxieties, aspirations. A really attuned supervisor might see a subordinate who's prone to anger not as a problem, but as a useful tool.
Big tool.
A tool that can be deployed later to challenge rivals or to handle a nasty negotiation or absorb political risk. They're constantly analyzing the strategic utility of their team's emotional profile.
Okay, let's move to tactic 2, the conscious manipulation of the outward emotional display, the mask.
Tactic 2 is disguising and expressing emotions for personal gain. High EI individuals intentionally shape their emotional presentation to create a favorable impression. They display whatever emotion is most conducive to their objective, regardless of how they actually feel inside. If they need trust, they project calm. If they need urgency, they project a little bit of measured anxiety.
It's emotional labor for pure self-interest.
It is, and this becomes especially potent when you're dealing with negative emotions, particularly for people with organizational power.
How so?
Well, among those with high power, negative displays, intimidation, frustration, even anger can be used strategically because high power reduces the personal inhibition you need to control those displays. But high EI is absolutely essential to judge precisely when an angry outburst will speed things up versus when it will just cause resentment and backlash. It's a precision tool.
And they can maintain an emotional high ground, sort of separate from the group.
Yes, by resisting what's called emotional contagion. That's the spontaneous spread of emotion through a group. High EI people can regulate their own feelings to resist it, which creates this distinct power asymmetry. They're influencing what everyone else feels while remaining internally unmoved and focused on their goal. They control the emotional thermostat.
Tactic 3 gets even more subtle. It's about shaping how others even understand an event, defining reality through emotion.
This is one of the most manipulative forms. Tactic 3 is stirring and shaping emotions via misattribution. High EI individuals can manipulate the meaning of ambiguous events. They can label other people's undifferentiated, emerging emotions to advance their own agenda.
Okay, give me a corporate example. Let's say a big project fails. The team is feeling anxious and scared, but they don't know who to blame.
Perfect example. In that moment of uncertainty, people are desperate for an explanatory framework. The high EI manipulator steps in. They construe the failure in a frame that serves their interests. They might label the group's collective fear as a feeling of injustice because of a competitor's unethical actions, or anger at our outdated corporate policy.
So they divert the blame away from themselves.
Exactly. They skillfully align the group's fear or anger against a rival or a policy they want to change. They don't just detect the emotion, they provide the meaning for that emotion. They help their colleagues interpret their own feelings in a way that defines justice or injustice favorably to the manipulator.
And that leads right into the final tactic, controlling the flow of emotionally charged information.
Tactic 4, strategic control of emotion-laden information. This is about managing how emotions are infused into the information network. It often means occupying a central network position, becoming the organizational Iago, to affect reputations and influence decisions.
The sources have two really interesting examples here about a high EI supervisor using over-rewarding and under-rewarding.
Yes, these are classic examples. A high EI supervisor might strategically over-reward a subordinate. Give them praise or resources that far exceed their actual contribution. This is designed to exploit feelings of guilt and gratitude.
The subordinate feels indebted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Securing their long-term compliance, which the supervisor can cash in on later. Alternatively, they can strategically under-reward someone. Maybe give them a slightly less desirable task or a little less credit without breaking any formal rules. They do this specifically to trigger a predictable reaction of anger and a sense of inequity.
And then they can use that reaction against them.
They take advantage of it, maybe using it as an excuse to block that person's advancement or to justify their own superior position.
And how does a subordinate use information control?
A high EI subordinate will strategically select and withhold information and emotional expressions. They might act extraordinarily calm or even bored when a crisis hits their department to mislead their supervisor about its importance. Or, conversely, they'll ingratiate themselves by feeding the supervisor highly affirming evidence and praise, controlling the emotional tenor of every exchange to build trust and ensure their own personal benefit.
Okay, so we've covered how our individual calibrations, IQ, EQ, and testosterone, are specialized tools. But now we have to talk about the stage itself. The modern environment, which the sources argue is actively distorting the performance of all these evolved adaptations. This is the evolutionary mismatch.
The core problem here is all about context. Our psychological mechanisms were forged over millennia in ancestral environments. Small, stable social groups, low mobility, low-frequency stimuli. But the vast majority of research on our behavior today is based on samples living in environments that are dramatically different.
And these populations are summed up by that acronym, strangely weird. We should probably define that.
Right. Strangely weird samples are populations from societies that are typically rich, anonymous, novel, gender equal, educated, law-abiding, young, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Basically the opposite of the small, highly interdependent groups of our evolutionary past.
And the most profound distortion comes from what researchers call supernormal stimuli, the sheer intensity of the input.
Correct. Our modern environment provides input to our psychological mechanisms that is often, quote, several orders of magnitude greater than anything ancestral humans ever encountered. Our hardwired adaptations, which were designed for low-frequency, low-intensity cues, are just being completely overwhelmed. It's leading to distorted outputs, especially in mating and social behavior. Our psychology is being flooded.
Let's get specific on the 4 key characteristics of this mismatched environment, starting with the most obvious one. The sheer volume of choices. Lots of options.
Ancestrally, a person might have encountered a few dozen potential mates in their entire lifetime. That was it. Modern cities, amplified by dating apps, expose you to thousands of potential partners. And this unprecedented number of options completely changes how we make decisions.
How does it shift our strategy away from the ancestral method?
The ancestral method was likely a weighted average strategy, a holistic assessment, balancing trade-offs across all of a person's attributes. But when you're faced with choice overload, you switch to what's called elimination by aspects. You just screen out hundreds of options by evaluating one single attribute at a time, height, salary, one aspect of a photo.
Because the cognitive load is just too high to do it any other way.
Exactly. And this often leads to chronic dissatisfaction with the choice you do make, or greater vulnerability to choice overload, where having too many options makes people less likely to choose at all.
Next up is social media, which is the ultimate novel delivery system for cues. It just makes the option problem even worse.
It does. Social media exposes you to massive amounts of visual information incredibly quickly. You can swipe through dozens of curated, idealized images in just a few minutes. And crucially, the information is often a highly deceptive version of reality. It's missing all the subtle cues our ancestral systems relied on, like scent, body language, vocal tone.
And this constant exposure to these fake, idealized versions of other people, that has to influence how you see yourself.
It significantly influences your self-assessment and your self-perceived mate value. When you compare yourself to these ubiquitous, inaccurate portrayals, your sense of your own value can shift, often downward. And changes in your self-perceived mate value directly influence your mating strategy.
For example,
Men who experience a boost in their self-perceived mate value from these digital comparisons tend to score higher on sociosexuality, meaning a greater inclination toward casual, short-term mating. The low-quality, high-volume digital cues are distorting our evolved calibration of our own self-worth.
the third characteristic, autonomous, deals with the loss of the social guardrails that used to protect relationships.
Yes. Most modern individuals lack the influence of closely watching kin. Ancestrally, parents and family exerted huge, sometimes total control over mate choice. They prioritized things that were good for the family, like resources and commitment, often over the individual's romantic preference.
So without that critical, evolved input mechanism, what happens to modern mating behavior?
The absence of that kin input is hypothesized to promote this profound indecision, or just long delays in pair bonding, especially for high-value males who feel less pressure to commit. U.S. Census data supports this. The median age of first marriage is at an all-time high, nearly 30 for men, 28 for women. Mating decisions take longer because they're based on fleeting individual preferences.
And finally, the extreme mobility of modern life. Relocatable.
Ancestral human territories were small. Everyone knew everyone. Modern transportation allows us to travel thousands of miles easily, which creates anonymity. And this extreme mobility fundamentally reduces the perceived cost of engaging in behaviors that would have had negative reputational consequences.
Because if you burn your bridges, you just move.
Precisely. Behaviors like mate poaching or exploitation or uncommitted sexual strategies, they all become less costly because you can just relocate and escape the social retaliation that would have been impossible in a small ancestral group. This high anonymity combined with relocatability might increase sexual conflict because the costs for bad behavior are so much lower.
This whole mismatch discussion leads us directly to the final and highly controversial framework from our sources, sexual economics theory. And we really need to emphasize, again, this is a highly debated, often fringe hypothesis that gets a lot of criticism for cultural bias.
It is extremely controversial, yes. But it tries to apply this pure economic and biologically deterministic lens to mating. The core claim is that sexual behavior follows fundamental economic principles based on the maxim that sex is a female resource that men desire, creating a fundamental bargaining imbalance.
And how do the proponents of this theory allege that this market functions?
They argue that women hold out on sex until they receive valued resources, commitment, loyalty, attention, money from men. It's a perspective rooted in some pretty outdated gender stereotypes, and it's then often retro-projected onto all cultures and all of history, assuming female sexuality has this greater intrinsic value than male sexuality everywhere.
What modern examples do the proponents cite to support this transactional view of sex?
They point to modern phenomena where sex is exchanged for financial benefits, especially in these high-density anonymous environments. So things like highly publicized virginity auctions, where young women sell their virginity for tuition money, or the growing popularity of sugar baby relationships, where primarily female sugar babies trade their time for significant financial support from male sugar daddies. Proponents use this gender discrepancy to argue that women universally treat sex as a financial resource.
And they also point to historical legal structures.
Yes, they highlight gender-differentiated legal systems around adultery. They cite examples like the Philippines, where a woman can be charged for adultery, but a man is only charged with concubinage under very specific conditions. They use that kind of legal asymmetry to argue that female sexuality has historically been treated as this controlled, high-value resource.
But the criticisms against this theory are overwhelming. It seems to be based on flawed data and profound cultural bias.
The criticisms are severe. First, the theory relies heavily on these biologically deterministic views and outdated Western gender stereotypes that they don't replicate cross-culturally. Critics point out that proponents often ignore matrilineal or egalitarian societies where sexual drives are treated as equal or are even characterized by higher female libido, which completely undermines the theory's claim of universality.
And we have to address the most serious statistical flaw in the data they often use.
The mathematical impossibility. Self-report data commonly shows men reporting significantly more lifetime sexual partners than women. But with roughly equal numbers of men and women in the population, that is literally a mathematical impossibility.
So what's causing that discrepancy?
Critics argue it's purely an artifact of cultural shame and dishonesty, a social desirability bias. Men inflate their numbers to conform to a masculine ideal, and women underreport theirs to conform to a feminine ideal.
And has that bias been tested scientifically?
It has. Studies using methods like the bogus pipeline, where people think they're hooked up to a lie detector, found that when you control for that social desirability bias, women report nearly identical numbers of lifetime sexual partners as men. This really strongly suggests that the perceived gender difference in sexual market value is a cultural construction, not a biological reality.
So the theory has a profound cultural bias as well.
It does. It retroprojects these culturally bound Western phenomena, specifically 18th and 19th century bourgeois morality that constructed the horny male and the coy, resource-seeking female onto all other societies. Anthropological data from non-patriarchal foraging groups often shows the exact opposite, with sexual egalitarianism, which completely undermines the theory's core premise.
So it seems the evolutionary mismatch and the rise of autonomous mating have amplified these cultural narratives, which in turn influence how we think about relationships, regardless of whether those narratives are based on reality or not.
We have now completed our deep dive into these 4 specialized dances of human behavior. We've explored how the mind's unique calibrations, the analytical logic that can lead to paralysis, the strategic acuity that can turn empathy into a tool, and the risk-taking hormonal drive for status all operate as these high-stakes tools in social life.
And we've seen how these individual traits are inherently tied to status and social dynamics, whether that status is gained through brilliant analysis, careful emotional manipulation in a corporate hierarchy, or the willingness to take a risky minority position to prove you're right.
What this deep dive really reveals, at the end of the day, is that the performance of these dances is constantly being distorted and amplified by the radical differences of the modern world. The anonymity of being able to relocate, the overwhelming options from social media, the sudden autonomy in mate choice, they all act as supernormal stimuli, pushing our evolved psychology far beyond the range it was designed for.
The value of this knowledge isn't in judging one cognitive or hormonal setting as right or wrong. It's in understanding how your specific calibration interacts with these powerful, novel social forces. Understanding your own dance and the environment of the dance floor, where the music is louder, the floor is crowded with digital ghosts, and the lighting is rigged for maximum distortion, that is the first step toward navigating the complexity of modern status and relationships.